Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I know that we always talk about how entrepreneurship is such a force for good in the world. But today, I think it's safe to say, for the first time ever on the show, we're talking about how entrepreneurship can actually help preserve culture. And we are joined by an incredible entrepreneur that is so mission-driven in what she does that she is making a big difference in the world. And you're going to hear how she has rallied the troops together for amazing people to come together and help make this mission possible through a crowdfunding campaign where people have said, yes, we support this. We want to be a part of your mission. And that is so aligned with the great work that today's guest, Nadine Zaza, is doing. Let me introduce you to Nadine. She is a designer, entrepreneur, and cultural strategist dedicated to preserving and celebrating global heritage through experiential learning. She founded her company, Culture Crate, all the way back in 2021, drawing from her experiences working with refugees, using design as a tool for social and cultural engagement, and her time at MIT, where she earned a Master of Science in Engineering and Management with a focus on human-centered design, entrepreneurship, and cultural preservation. With a background in architecture and design from Rhode Island School of Design, she merges design thinking, storytelling, and business strategy to create impactful ways for people to engage with intangible cultural heritage. If you think to yourself, that is a lofty goal, that is quite ambitious. Well, that's what's so cool about Nadine's story. She has taken so many of her experiences, her perspective, her stories, her talents, her skills, and combined it in all of these ways. As an MIT-trained entrepreneur, she has built a mission-driven business, secured funding, and navigated the complexities of launching a social enterprise. She has pitched Culture Crate at South by Southwest EDU and successfully reached her Kickstarter funding goal, further solidifying her vision of making cultural traditions more accessible, interactive, and sustainable for future generations. I'm personally so excited to learn from Nadine today, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Nadine Zaza. All right, Nadine, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And again, thank you for that phenomenal introduction. Sometimes I forget that I've done some of those things, so it's good to hear it back.
Yes, I love that. Well, honestly, that's only the tip of the iceberg. I could have gone on for a long time because obviously I've done quite a bit of research ahead of you and I getting together today, and I'm excited to hear the story directly from you. Who's Nadine? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I'm a child of immigrants. My family came from Jordan, from the Middle East, and, we lived in California. And I think in our time being here, I found that much of the education I was trying to experience and here didn't always reflect my background, and oftentimes the background of many other minority students. And that's kind of evolved and it's found its way in other ways that I've kind of engaged in my own education. I ended up studying design and architecture at RISD, which you had mentioned in the introduction. But even after that, I wanted to make an even bigger impact than just designing. I wanted to see how I could really introduce design thinking and some of my own experiences and my identity into education. So I ended up working for an MIT-founded ed tech company and design education startup, where I actually ended up building design education studios. So it was design studios, but really at the root of it was culturally responsive teaching. And I hadn't known that at the time, but I was developing content and curricula that was really reflective of different students' backgrounds. And during that time, I built, I think it was about 3 years I was there. I had built design studios where students kind of could engage in their own identity or in large and complex social and cultural issues in a way that felt tangible, in a hands-on way. And culturally responsive pedagogy in its entirety has proven time and time again to be a really phenomenal strategy in education. It leads to higher graduation rates, to improved self-esteem and stronger critical thinking skills, not just for minority and students or students of color, but also for all students in a classroom. And when you combine that with the design thinking and it builds this really powerhouse of learning and of education in this really hands-on way where students can really engage, create, and innovate rather than just kind of absorb and lose that knowledge over time. And when I was doing this, I ended up not just building curricula and teaching, but also training educators on how to teach this kind of design thinking and culturally responsive pedagogy. And I worked with a lot of educators from refugee backgrounds who were from Syria and also from Palestine, both in Turkey and in Jordan. And oftentimes we were asking ourselves questions of, what is the future of education? And how can we ensure that students who are coming from these backgrounds, who are coming from displacement, from war, from a lot of uncertainty, and ensure that they have that certainty built into them. And really, those are the questions that help guide the creation of Culture Crate. And also making it an accessible learning experience, not just for students, but it ended up evolving into becoming a product, an educational product for people and through a B2C market. And those questions then kind of led into my fascination with UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And UNESCO has this intangible cultural heritage list. And heritage is actually so much more than ancient ruins and the historical landmarks that maybe you and I might be familiar with, but it's also the living, breathing narratives of our collective story. It's shaped humanity, and UNESCO created that list as a global effort to protect the stories, the songs, the rituals, and the craftsmanship that really define who we are. And that list didn't exist until 2003, and it was only until 2008 that they started to inscribe some of these cultural practices in. And when I first was looking into this list 3 or 4 years ago, it was at 580 intangible cultural practices, and now it's at 721. So what we're seeing here is that there's a real challenge in getting traditions recognized, but it's not fast and it's not easy. And as this list is growing, which it certainly is, traditions are disappearing faster than we can really protect them. And it's also really interlinked with language. So, and that's also what I was specializing in, and how do we teach design education in maybe other languages as well. And I found myself really building curriculum, but then I ended up wanting to pursue building Culture Crate, and that's when I ended up at MIT in a human-centered design program to really advance the development of Culture Crate. And from there, just continuing to work towards, preserving culture alongside the cultural practitioners that have been safeguarding these practices for generations.
Gosh, Nadine, I love that overview. You managed to pack so much into that because it's so clear that your journey really is the intersection of all these things that are deeply meaningful and impactful to you. And as someone who comes from an immigrant family myself, listeners know how much that plays into the way that I see the world. Being a first-generation American, my mom's family came here from Albania. And Nadine, I know that means you and I both probably grew up hearing so many stories from our parents and from our grandparents about what the motherland was like, what the old country was like, and what their cultures and traditions were like. And it's so cool to see that you and I grew up with that, but you are now bringing it to the masses. You are ensuring in a really scalable and impactful way that this is something that prolongs and withstands the test of time. I'd love for you to share with listeners about how entrepreneurship, how you identified that as a powerful vehicle for positive change, for that cultural preservation, because Nadine, you're not just talking about this stuff, you're doing it in a really impactful way.
And yeah, thank you so much. And I'd hope that I'm actually doing that. But, I think we've done a lot of testing. So I think this is really rooted in my human-centered design background is, you are also need finding. So, much of the questions that I started off with these educators and even with myself was rooted in this serious need around connecting with culture in a deeply intentional in an authentic way, which I think is really wanted by consumers most of the time. And with education, I think it's clear to some extent too that it's hard to find exactly what you're looking for. And when diaspora communities are growing, and with these cultural practices also potentially going extinct within our lifetime, it is really critical that we engage. And I think we were finding that really clear connection that tradition and education can coexist. And, one of the things we're also looking at through these UNESCO this UNESCO list was that one of the biggest threats isn't just modernization or displacement, it's also just the breakdown of that knowledge of transfer. And where that sweet spot is in being able to preserve these practices is in education. And as education has evolved, many of these practices has evolved, and we're trying to work alongside the practitioners to be able to pass down these systems of knowledge, and really just help in actively preserving them and transferring it and ensuring that they survive. So one of the first things that we've done is make sure that we're listening to people and communities. So we did a lot of interviews with people. We built personas, and from those personas we were trying to consider what is the attempt in how we solve for this. And we found that people were most interested in getting a hands-on kit because there is a popularity around educational kits. But what we were finding as well when we were doing product market research was that some of these educational kits were conflating maybe intangible cultural heritage or knowledge with maybe heritage sites, and that knowledge wasn't always articulated in the clearest way, and oftentimes culture or people were being represented as a monolith, and we were really looking at these nuances within the practices themselves, and oftentimes in some of these educational kits they weren't even showing who the people were behind the learning. And I think that was doing a disservice to folks who really wanted to engage intentionally. So, we created this system where we were building this almost like mini curricula within our kit. And what we're doing is looking at some of these cultural practices and kitifying, so we're scaling down the cultural practice to be a truly accessible bilingual experience that can be used in a hands-on way. So our first crate actually looks at Palestinian soap making, which is a tradition that's been around for over 1,000 years, that has been practiced by the indigenous cultural practitioners within not only the occupied West Bank but across Palestine for quite some time. And our Kickstarter campaign that you had mentioned in the introduction is actually looking at that practice. So our first offering of Culture Crate is our Salboon Crate, which is the Palestinian soap making kit. And we've kind of scaled down that experience of soap making into this kit, and built a lot of content around it, and history lessons and understandings of language and chemistry. And what we found was that it's a really cross-curricular experience, and we've pitched this and also built it for communities that are kind of in their first or second generation experience. So for people that are around our age. So millennials or Gen Z, but oftentimes those are the folks that have been wanting this kind of knowledge and wanting this kind of learning.
Yeah, Nadine, gosh, there are so many things that I want to get into with you here on the air, and I know that time is going to fly by, but I do want to hone in directly onto the Kickstarter because I feel like it's the culmination of so many of these incredible things that you're doing and that you're putting into the world. I've obviously seen it. So listeners, just so that you're all aware of the context, Nadine and I are having this conversation with still 20 days to go in her Kickstarter, and she has already gone past her fundraising target. And so what's really cool is we're going to drop at the end of this episode some information on how you can get involved, even though the Kickstarter will have finished by the time the episode airs. But still, Nadine, talking about that Kickstarter, it's beautiful from a design element. It is so clear how intentional you've been into how you create and present this to the world, and how you preserve that cultural component. However, at the same time, what I really admire is you've also married all of that with incredible business practice. You have gotten it in front of people. You've made it in a crowdfunding fashion, a thing that people can rally behind and get behind together. There's so many things that you've intentionally and strategically done right. Walk us through that whole process, because I am so in admiration of what you've built and put into the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think part of the biggest advice we were getting from folks, and, we were designing this for people in mind, and, we were getting advice and we were getting feedback from so many people. And we realized that some of the best ways to actually fund a project, to validate if it actually makes sense in the market, is to do crowdfunding, which is, it's meant for the people. It could be funded for the people. And Kickstarter felt like that really healthy starting off point for us to really validate and really see if our value proposition really stuck with folks. And, for a DIY kit like this, there are a lot out there, but I think where our value proposition really lied was in the authenticity we were really offering in the kit, and that you were also getting a sense that at least for our Palestinian soap making kit, which is our first one, that people are getting a really experiential learning moment where you open this kit up, you see the people behind the soap practice, you see the soap makers, and then the people who are cultivating the agricultural lands throughout the West Bank. You are getting Palestinian olive oil. You are getting the knowledge around it. So, and also part of our proceeds is going towards building up the soap making efforts of families in the West Bank, because, there used to be 40 or 50 families that had factories. Now there's only 2, with actually one of the soap factories being a UNESCO heritage site. And, as time progresses, some of these practices and the knowledge around it may be lost, and we don't want to wait for that. And I think it is a deep honor to be able to have our first crate really reflect Palestinian culture and a people who have oftentimes been misunderstood and misrepresented, not just in education, but in their long arc of them being in the media. So I'm really proud of this being our first offering, and we're really excited, in our longer mission and vision of Culture Crate, to be able to expand and explore the many other cultural practices that are intangible and that people really want to learn about and engage with.
Yeah, Nadine, I so appreciate the way that you articulate these things and the way that you do justice to the things that are meaningful. Even hearing you talk about the actual families behind it, I mean, even just you and I talking about it here, I'm getting chills up and down my body, and it's because this stuff it's deeply meaningful to you. And I feel like it's a term that we throw around a lot in entrepreneurship, is mission driven. We always talk about our mission and our values. To me, it's clear that that's the lens through which you design your products. That's the lens through which you write your marketing copy and do your marketing and talk about your business. And here you are in this podcast episode talking to us about all of these things. What does mission driven mean to you? How do you, obviously you're very clear on what your mission is, and I think it comes from your childhood and your family and your upbringing and all of those, and of course your experiences, but how do you ensure that actually comes to life in what it is that you do?
Oh, what a great question. I mean, I think for us, mission-driven feels like it has gone beyond just even what we're doing. I mean, we've been able to put our Sabun Crate and our different Culture Crate offerings in front of other folks, and the stories that they share with us, that they had their grandmothers making this kind of soap growing up, that the last time that they smelled the soap was when they were, young kids, maybe when they were in Palestine, and they haven't been able to go back. And I can't explain to you how meaningful it is to be able to create a product and to create an opportunity for people to engage in this way. Having gone to MIT, and it's a very tech-centered, space, I often ask myself, what does it mean to create a product or a startup or, a social enterprise that is, again, mission-driven, like many other startups, but we don't have tech as that initial component. It's not initially how we were advertising ourselves and promoting ourselves. And I oftentimes was asking who's being left behind when we are talking about tech. And oftentimes it's the people behind these practices. And I just can't bring myself to create something in the world that doesn't have them in mind, that doesn't have these indigenous cultural practitioners in mind. And I think being mission driven in what we're doing as well is also co-designing. And I think that's where that humanity and human-centered design component comes in, is that we are so dedicated to developing this alongside people. And I think that's precisely what that mission is co-design. And I think that's something that I've really always really taught my own students is that what does it look like when you're a user-centered designer? Who are you engaged with? Are you asking the difficult questions? Are you really creating a solution that is addressing the needs and also the problem at hand? And I think that that's truly what we've done. And I think that has presented itself really clearly in us being able to reach that initial goal. And it's exciting and it's scary. And I think that that's the point of being an entrepreneur. And creating something like this that is so social and cultural, and is rooted in the deepest form of empathy and respect you can have for indigenous cultural practitioners, especially Palestinian ones, I think is such a tribute to them. It's such a tribute to folks that have honored these traditions for centuries. And I'm just grateful to be in their presence and to work alongside them.
Yeah, Nadine. And I always remind listeners when we have amazing entrepreneurs on like you, I like to remind listeners that you're not just doing this work, you are simultaneously one of us. You're also growing your own business. And obviously you've been living in and around it within the world of academia for so long that I think it's really cool to think about the fact that you're doing this impactful and meaningful work. You're successfully fundraising to make it happen, but you're also doing all the business things that we all have to do as entrepreneurs. Talk to us about what that side of the coin has been like, because it's great to look at your Kickstarter and say, oh, Nadine is an amazing storyteller. She's got great pictures. She has such a compelling way of course, designing all of this stuff and making it a reality. But Nadine, I know, having been an entrepreneur for 17 years up to this point, that there's all the mindset things that go into entrepreneurship. There's all the logistical things, accounting and legal and compliance and all of that. What's Nadine, the entrepreneur, going through these days?
I'm going through a lot. I'm finding myself being much more of a content creator, and I think that also resonates with folks. They want to feel like there's a story behind not just the product but also the person behind the product, which I think oftentimes I end up being there, but I'm trying my best to also put the cultural practitioners in the spotlight as well. And I think it's been a phenomenal experience. I think there was one video that we created with someone in Palestine, and it reached, I think, almost 2 million views, and it was purely about the knowledge and practice of soap making in Palestine. And I think just being able to share that knowledge is so critical, and to be able to experience it through our crates is going to be another step in that kind of preservation effort in celebrating that knowledge. And I think trying to build this business as well, it's been complex. I never say things are complicated. I think complex kind of carries it a little bit better, because it just means that it's like tangled up, but you're able to kind of sift through it and eventually reach the end, hopefully. And I found myself having to really refine our business model, so that we can ensure that there's an authenticity and that there's a willingness to pay for people to be able to purchase a crate like ours, and then understand that the money they're putting into purchasing the crate, it's not just going into getting that experience, but part of their proceeds are going towards the preservation efforts as well. And I think for us, looking at preservation as an action, that you can activate preservation through our crates, I think has been really critical. And obviously looking at the COGS, so looking at how much does it cost to create the crates, where are we figuring out our supply chain. There's also just been difficulty in sourcing some things, and I think this is true of trying to ethically source products in aspects of our crate from Palestine as well. People really want to be able to purchase something where they understand that they're supporting multiple economies. That was something that was really important to us. So we found with our first crate, with Sabun crate, that we wanted to make sure that it was Palestinian olive oil. We wanted to make sure that the content, the knowledge in the crate was also being ethically sourced, and that we were working alongside the practitioners. So it's been a big mix, and also working with artisans as well. So, it's been a mix. It's been exciting, and I think that this is the entrepreneur's journey. It's wearing multiple hats and being able to work alongside so many people to make that happen. And I think there have been so many people that have made it happen. And I'm, again, always so grateful that people have hopped on this journey to work on this project, but also in supporting us through the campaign as well.
Yeah, Nadine, those are the entrepreneurial realities. I'm so grateful for the way that you share that with listeners, because it's easy to see these finished products. It's easy to go onto Kickstarter and see these projects that are getting off the ground, but holy cow, even just hearing you talk about the supply chain, obviously there are real tangible business questions that you've had to answer, and I'm sure there's been some dead ends at times. I'm sure there's been twists and turns and detours, but the fact that you navigate all of that, you're absolutely spot on. It is the entrepreneur's journey. I've been putting guests a little bit on the spot here in 2025 with this line of questioning, but I really enjoy hearing the raw and unfiltered insights, and that is, where's your mind go when you think about the future? Obviously, there's so much good that you want to do in the world. I can see your face already reacting to the question. So, Nadine, I want to get into that founder and that CEO's mind of yours. When you think about the future, obviously, you've got one very successful Kickstarter under your belt already, and I know that that's the start. A lot of people think it's the finish. It's the start of a journey.
The start. It truly is.
Yeah, so Nadine, with all of that in mind, where do you go when you think about the future?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Like, we reached our goal, in Arabic, and like as a Muslim, I'll say Alhamdulillah, that we were able to reach the 10,000 goal that we had for Kickstarter. But it's always, well, we need more to be able to do this, and there's a stretch goal, and there's, so I think the vision and mission we have is that it was amazing to validate Sabun Crate as our first offering now. But our mission and vision for Culture Crate in the future is that we're able to create many, many, many other crates. We've looked at also categorizing our crates into other Arab cultural practices, but also we've had conversations with other people who maybe are not from that cultural background, like indigenous people of Turtle Island, who are look at our crates and are like, we can do this for this practice. I've talked to people from Latin American backgrounds and people who have experienced indigenous African cultural practices, and they say, we can do this for this practice and that practice. And that gets me excited, because I think it's then resonated with other folks that this is something that can kind of expand out of it. And that's what our hope was. And I think it's been exciting to create something where it starts in Palestine, but then we're able to explore many other cultural practices from around the world, and work alongside other indigenous cultural practitioners to ensure that their knowledge is preserved, and we're working alongside them to preserve it. And also proceeds also go to supporting their efforts. And I think that balance has always been the driving force and the power of what we've been doing. But yeah, that's like the goal. And it's kind of crazy that like we reached this Kickstarter goal, but there's so many other things we want to do. And I've already been in conversation with other folks about like starting the next kit. And I'm getting people asking about, what about a Sudanese kit? And I'm like, yes, absolutely. Let's go there. And it's great because it means people believe in it.
Yeah, Nadine, I will tell you, from the outside looking in, it is more than just believing it, seeing what you've built and designed and developed and launched. It truly is incredible. And that's why you and I talking about it on a podcast episode is one thing, but listeners, of course, we're going to drop the links. They're going to be down below in the show notes as well. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But seeing the intentionality, I feel like I keep using that word within the context of what you do. Intentionality, it's because there's so much heart that goes into it. There's so much thinking. There's so much of everything that makes entrepreneurship a positive force for change in the world. And so, yeah, it's no surprise to me, Nadine. And so before we drop those links and before you share with listeners how they can get involved, I always love asking this question at the end of every interview. It's super broad, Nadine. I have no idea which direction you're going to take it in, but I'm excited to hear your advice. And that is, of course, what's your one best piece of advice? You're a fellow entrepreneur. We're being listened to by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in over 150 countries around the world. They're at all different stages of their own entrepreneurial growth journeys. So what's that one thing you want to leave them with today?
Oh gosh, this is such a great question. I remember being told this in undergrad, but it was listening is one of the most important things that we could be doing as an entrepreneur and as people in the world. And I found that when I was listening that I had the greatest power and the greatest impact that I could have. And in fact, the quote I have is, you're in the presence of a good listener when you're surprised with what comes out of your own mouth. And I found that if I use that to gauge every conversation I've had, whether it was with refugee students, with other educators, and with Indigenous cultural practitioners themselves, that I was surprised with what I was sharing. And I think taking the listening and empowering others and working alongside them to create something special and consistently listening throughout, I think is precisely what we can do. And I think every entrepreneur, they should just put their product down, they should put their vision down and just listen. And that always excites me, is when I'm able to listen to others and hear their stories. And I think that's always empowered me.
Wow, Nadine, over 1,100 episodes. It's rare that I hear original, new, unique advice here on the air for that question. I've asked that question in every episode, and I so love the way that you articulated that and how you share that with our audience. Incredibly valuable advice. You beat me to the punch. You said it's not just about entrepreneurship. This is just about humanity. It's about being a person and being a positive contributor in the world. So listeners, that's our invitation. Nadine didn't just drop on you great life advice, great business advice, but apply it to your sales, apply it to your marketing, apply it to every single thing that you do, and you'll start to see your world changing. So Nadine, I so appreciate that. There's a big onus on you today to share your links with listeners, because I want all of our listeners to go check out all the great work that you're doing. So Nadine, where the heck should they go from here?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be an entrepreneur if there wasn't a call to action at the end of whatever pitch or conversation I had. So the call to action here is, our Kickstarter campaign is going to end in March, but we're going to have late pledges. So if you look up our Kickstarter campaign, which is Palestinian soap making, preserving sabun, you can still get a sabun crate. You can pledge. You can also find us at culturecrate.org and our Instagram, culturecrateco. And you could learn more about what we're doing there. And we're excited to hopefully be developing our next crate in the summer.
Yes, and listeners, we wouldn't be a podcast if we didn't put all those links down below in the show notes for you. You don't have to remember any of these things. Wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode, scroll right on down to the show notes, and you can click right on through to Nadine's Kickstarter. You can scroll down and find her website, her socials. All those good links are waiting for you all down below. So Nadine, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk about this work and, obviously get to meet you.